Hello, this is Ross Baker, President of the Tualatin Historical Society. This is a re-recording of a program that we did on the 2nd of June about hops in the Tualatin Valley. And we had some technical difficulty, but still you gave us some nice comments. So if you're watching this for the first time or the second time, there's no doubt you'll enjoy it or enjoy it even more. And now I'm going to hand it over to Mark Browne at the Oswego Heritage House and let him tell you all about hops in the Tualatin Valley.
Good morning. I'm Mark Browne. I'm the archivist and the historian at the Oswego Heritage House. I'm a volunteer and have been there for about 5 years. And our partnership with the Tualatin Historical Society is really dear to me. We started that up about 4 or 5 years ago, and it has developed into a really good relationship. I was asked to do a presentation of my choice to the community here. And what I chose, lots of things to choose from, but what I chose was hops. I have written 2 works, both are an analysis of diaries, one from 1898, written by the granddaughters of Waters Carman, and the other one is a huge volume of an analysis of the Baker Cook diaries in Hazalia. Hazalia is the area just south of Lake Oswego all the way down to the river, and it's now called the Stafford Hamlet. And in that particular work, there's 10 diaries that I chose out of 30. And in both sets of diaries, the Waters Carman and the Baker Cook diaries, both of them talk in depth about the relationship between their communities in Oswego and Tualatin. So I chose to pick. I picked hops because it is a major event in the lives of all of the families around here, and I became intrigued with it. Okay. I'll stay here. Okay. A strabile of the hop plant Humulus lupulus is the flower of the hops plant, and it is the reason why beer is what it is today. Okay. The first reference to hops was written by Pliny the Elder in his Natural History book 21, chapter 50, and he described a plant which we call the hops, the Lupulus solitarius, and he called it the wolf of the willows. It was sort of common knowledge at that time that the hops plant would bind and wrap around willow trees and eventually strangle them. And he called that predatory botany Wolf of the Willows. And there is a beer company called Wolf of the Willows that makes a rather remarkable IPA. Not exactly my cup of tea, but it's a thing. And the Russian River Brewing Company has a beer that they produce called Pliny the Elder. And that's the original source of it. Interesting thing about Pliny the Elder was that he died in 79 AD when Mount Vesuvius blew up. And he was remarkable. If you ever have time, Google Pliny the Elder, and his life story is really fascinating. He was a general in the Roman army, then he became a captain. And when Vesuvius was blowing up, he took his fleet across the bay to Pompeii to rescue his family. Got stranded, if you will, because the pyroclastic flow was coming down at the time. The rest of the fleet turned around and went back, but he persisted, landed, and eventually died that afternoon. So it was a bad day for Pliny. The historic use of hops, the stems, vines, blossoms, were primarily used as medicinal poultices and teas and that sort of thing. They were used for pain relief, antipyretic, stomach ulcers, dermatological poultices, gout, and rheumatism. They were also eaten like food, and apparently they taste like asparagus. The industrial use throughout history has been in the production of alcohol, tanning leather in particular in London, paper making, and water purification. Vets use them to deworm animals, primarily cattle, diuretics, lice, glue, and moth repellents. And beer was originally added as the whole purpose of hops in beer initially was to use it as a preservative. It has antibacterial qualities that increase the shelf life, which was very important when you're storing a lot of beer and you need to keep it at least around for a little bit. Indian pale ale was actually developed with a heavy hops component to make it last from England all the way to India. But now, in modern times, it's used as a flavoring agent to give a particular bitter hop taste and impart an aroma to the beer. The bitterness of the hops was basically to offset the sugar produced in the brewing process. Otherwise, you would have really, really sweet beer. The first documented hops cultivation in Bavaria was in 736. A emperor named Pepin the Short lived in Saint Denis at the time in the mid 8th century. Actually left a document that recorded his precious things that he wanted to pass on to the next generation. And one of those things was the hops garden. It was a very valuable thing to him. The first mention of hops in brewing, in commercial brewing in Germany was in 1076. Hopped beer was imported to Britain from Holland. Henry VIII decided to stop the importation of hops from Germany and Belgium at the time and put a sort of hold on that. He was convinced somehow that hops were going to make his troops sick. So there was a little respite, if you will, from utilization of hops at that time. He got busy chopping off heads and eventually that went away. Hops was grown in the southeast of England by Dutch farmers in the 16th century, and King James implemented the first governmental quality control on imported hops. The Belgians had a habit of filling their hops exports with sand and leaves and gravel and bits and pieces to up the price of the hops, and King James put a stop to that. Eventually, by 1629, the cultivation by English and Dutch farmers in New York State was finally implemented on a sustained basis. In Oregon, William Wells planted the first hops in Polk County, Oregon. George Leisure raised the first Oregon's commercial hop harvest. William Wells started and then sort of crashed and burned, and then George Leisure took over in Eugene and actually established the first sustainable, organized commercial hop harvest. From 1905 to 1950, Oregon was the nation's largest hop producer, and the three centers, of course, were Grants Pass, Eugene, and Salem and Independence. Prohibition put a kink in that. Prohibition, certainly in Oswego and in other areas, started and stopped intermittently. I mean, they had votes about every 4 years about whether they should be wet or dry, and the counties would bounce back and forth between wet or dry. But eventually, you know, that there were parts that were dry right next to parts that were wet, so it really had very little impact. The national prohibition in 1919 through 33 actually did put a huge dent in the production of the business, and the farmers eventually went on to other things. Oregon eventually came back in 22 and became the hop center of the world. They introduced mechanical pickers, which decreased one of the huge issues with hops production and cultivation. It was very, very labor intensive. The mechanical pickers, they worked on how to pick hops with mechanical pickers for about 80 years, but they finally got something that was reasonably workable in the 1950s. Otherwise, it was picked by hand. And then today, Oregon is the second largest US producer and 5% of the world's supply. The first, of course, is Washington. This is kind of a cool map, I think, to show you the progress of hops all the way from basically 1629 all the way to today, how it is pretty much isolated in the Pacific Northwest in the United States. And in our state, the hops are grown commercially pretty much only in Marion and Polk counties with about 30 families. And of those 30 families that grow commercial hops in Oregon, a lot are 3, 4, and there's even a 5th generation hop grower, which is kind of a wonderful historical legacy. But you can see here how eventually it started to fade away. The East Coast had a rather large blight, sort of like the potato blight, if you will, that wiped out most of the hops, and they never came back. They switched to other things. California actually became a little too hot for the hops. You need a certain here we go, I'm sorry. The botany, or the anatomy of a hops is the strig, bractole, bract, and the lupulin glands. The whole point of the hops and beer is the lupulin glands. They produce a resin, kind of an oily, powdery type of resin, and that contains the chemicals and the molecules and the essential oils that the brewers want. And hops are dioecious. They're separate male and female plants. They're raised from root cuttings. The female plant produces the powder, the lupulin. They're horizontal vines providing nutrients from the soil. Vertical vines grow 20 to 30 feet, some even longer from the base. And the base is based on a little structure called the hill, and fresh vines are annually produced. New vines twist clockwise direction, clinging to the vertical vines. Ross asked me at the last meeting if in the Southern Hemisphere, the vines wind counterclockwise. I actually looked that up, and they actually don't. So the reason they don't is basically because the molecular structure of the alpha acids do not change regardless of what hemisphere they're in.
And that was your prediction.
Yeah, it was. So anyway, hops basically female flowers. The male flowers have a little bit of lupulin, but not much, and they're full of all kinds of weeds and just stuff that the brewers don't want. The female flowers actually have the highest concentration of the molecules, and they are the easiest to pick as well. So they cultivate and cull out all of the female flowers and make sure they're all isolated, and then the male flowers are discarded. The lupulin appears as a yellow resinous powder adhering to the individual bracts. And this is the organic chemistry of beer, if you will. This is why hops are grown. There's, I think, about 336 molecules involved in the hops flower. These are the 3 that actually everyone is after: the alpha, beta, and the flavonoids, giving the aroma and the bitter taste as well. And of course, everyone here have seen hops forever, and they're sort of staked out. There's various ways and sort of a bit of an evolution of how they came to this. Originally, they didn't put wires up, they just had the poles. Then once they strung the wires, they realized they could actually string strings in between the individual poles. The poles are placed about 6 to 8 feet apart, and a very definite way to do this to maximize the plant growth and to increase the height and ability for the flowers to get sunlight. This is one of the particular ways they do it, so they can get twice as many hops plants strung up in the same amount of space with light penetrating all the way to the base. They have to go through and cull out all of the stragglers so we have clean, open areas for the plants to get sunlight. The cultivation is kind of crucial. They're not a fragile plant by any means, but they need sand, silt, and clay in a latitude between 30 and 55 degrees, winter frosts, for dormancy in wet springs and dry summers. And the Willamette Valley is at 45 degrees, of course, which is just perfect. And so Germany is also where this all started. They plant in the late fall and the early spring, and the cuttings are cleared in fertilized ground. The ground has to be prepared really well in the beginning for the plants to do well. The furrows are planted in two directions, north and south and east and west, if you will, or east end to end, side to side. They have to be clean and pretty much weed free. The early spring culling of young roots removes the excess growth, so they don't have too much that strangle each other, because they'll kill willows, but they'll also kill themselves if given a chance. And you have to go through periodically to cull through them and let the light in. The new shoots are chosen at 2 to 3 feet to train up the support poles and set 6 to 10 feet apart. So that's actually kind of crucial. You have to, these are labor intensive product to do. You have to have a lot of people culling and harvesting all at the same time. So that was an issue. The harvesting, of course, is in late August and mid-September. In the diaries I told you about, the entire community, regardless of what community is, stops and everybody goes to the hops fields. And there's a window of maybe 5 to 10 days, maybe out as far as 15 days for the cones to be able to be picked. If you don't pick them within that time, they become oxidized and the oil and the essential components to it oxidize and then become spoiled. It's labor intensive. Again, just you need thousands and thousands of people to go out into the fields and pick these in a very short time. And it's 750 labor hours per acre. I think that's a little generous. I think it actually took a little bit longer than that. The 6 to 10 work days for 12 pickers per acre. So there are a lot of acres in the hops cultivation. So that's a lot of people. The issues that came up with the labor is that a vine rash called contact dermatitis from the stem hairs and little plant and the plant oils that get infused subdermally caused a really nasty rash. The numbers I read were that as many as 20% of the hop pickers got this, but it was much more than that, I think. I think the 20% figure applies to those that were debilitated so bad they couldn't continue to pick. But I think pretty much everybody that picked hops at one time or another got this rash. And there were chemicals, I think, in the hops that actually induced a gastrointestinal upset of diarrhea and other issues that were called the hops pickers blues. Again, the kids are all out in the sun full time, heat stroke, the sulfur fumes from the dryers, and then their drunken behavior was a big cultural issue with the staff that came in. The picking was either clean or dirty, and of course everybody wanted clean picks. They got more money if you picked the cones only and put them in the bags only. But if you had stems and twigs and vines and just dirt or whatever it was, like the Belgians did to the English, that was a big problem and diminished the profit of the farmers. So the farmers were always haranguing the workers to pick clean. Once they were picked, they had to be dried. You had to take them into a drying facility to get the moisture out of the hops. And the hops cones were as high as 85% moisture by weight. 50 pounds of green hops dried at 15 pounds. Specialty kilns called oasts were used to dry the hops. The drying floor on the second level was approached by outside ramps. The drying floor was slatted, covered with fabric, and the hops were stacked about 2 feet deep and raked, if you will, from time to time at a temperature below 145 for 10 to 15 hours. If you exceeded 145 degrees, you ruined the crop. So they had to be really careful on getting them hot enough to dry, but not too hot, so they would burn up, if you will. From 1850 to 1930, heating was by burning wood. They sometimes added sulfur to it, which accelerated the process and treated the hops cones really very well, but it tended to suffocate the workers down below. So it was a huge issue. Quite a few people died when sulfur was introduced until they sort of figured out a formula that worked well and ventilated the subfloor much better. This is a diagram, if you will, of a drying house. They were taken in on the second floor, stacked up. Once they were dried, they moved over to the cooling floor, and then they took once they were cooled properly, they were bagged and squished and pressed down into a little canvas bag. Now, in the diaries I told you about, the Carmen DLC, the two girls, the granddaughters of Waters Carmen, in 1898 would go up to the Stevenson's hop yard just north of the lake and would pick hops. This looks like quite a distance, but it's only about 1.25 miles, so it was not very far. But the Stevenson's hop yard in Oswego was one of the largest ones in the state at the time. This is a picture from 1896, 2 years before the girls wrote their diary. And this was the hop yards they went to as children to pick hops. It's pretty much, again, just up the street. And these are Oregon Historical Society photos that capture the essence of how big these farms could be. There's on the picture on the left, you will see the barn, the drying barn. And on the right, we actually have a real photo of the drying barn at the same time. These are really hard images to get. Oregon Historical Society does not like giving them up very well, but if you pay them enough money, you get these things. But these are really precious, and it shows you the second floor and the hopper down below, and how they would sort of pick them out of the hopper, put them in the bags and dry them up, take them up the ramp to the top of the drying barn. Cooling had to be done really fairly well. When the hops were tough, cool, and pliable, they were compressed into rectangular bales. Each of the bales was about 200 to 300 pounds, measuring 4 feet by 4 feet by 3 feet. Super, super heavy, and it took usually 2 people to handle them. The stored bales were kept cool and dry, and then they had to be graded before they went to market. The grading and all of that actually happens on the current commercial hops fields in Oregon right now. The grading and all of the preservation happens right then and there. At this time in 1898, or the turn of the century, they were just, once they were dried, they were bagged, and then they were taken off and put into facilities that did it. But they're all done in the farm, the whole process right now, including the preservation and the cooling and that sort of thing. Once you have all of the cones picked in bales, they were pulverized into a uniform size, and they were pelletized. They were the hops were crushed and milled and turned into a bit of a powder, and then they took them and they made pellets out of them. 2 different pellet machines, which each one are kind of interesting. There's the flat die pellets and the ring die pellets. The ring die pellets are enormous machines, and when you see the cones and the mash go through them, it looks like they're making a hamburger, if you will. Kind of a cool thing. Once they came out of the whatever pellet mill was used, they were bagged in moisture barrier bags, and then inert gas purged through the bags, and then they were vacuum sealed, and then they were kept at -20 degrees. Once they become pellets, they're very susceptible to light, heat, so they had to be protected. And this is how the process worked. They went from the cones to the pellets to the powder. The brewers would buy the powder, and the powder varies according to the chemistry involved in the hops. All of the final product has to be chemically analyzed. The state actually does this now, or you hire people to do it for the state. And then the alpha beta acid ratios are determined, the oil percentage, and a hop storage index is given to them. Brewers buy particular types of hops powder according to the type of beer they're trying to do, what type of hops influence they want, what type of aroma. And it varies, and they blend it, if you will, like wine. They'll take certain amounts of chemicals and add them all together until they get the type of hops flavor and aroma that they want. Some just do the aroma, that's all they're looking for, but most actually want the hop storage index to influence whatever type brand of commercial product that they're trying to produce. Then they do the physical test on them, and then once all of this is done and they're graded and analyzed and determined, there's a little sticker that goes on it that shows the brewer what the product is. This is an 1850 to 2020 indication of how the industry grew from 1850 all the way till now. It goes all the way from 8 pounds to 12 million pounds, if you will, now, and how much money they would earn. Again, one of the things that interested me in the diaries and in our community is how they went and got people to come out. There are actually generations of people that go to particular traditional sites. There's word of mouth when the hops would be picked, who would offer the best money. There were actual employment bureaus that offered advertisements to the farmers to recruit people, and the newspapers had dozens and dozens of ads indicating that it was a wholesome, fresh air, sunlight, great exercise to get out of the stinky city and breathe and have almost a vacation, if you will. Profit was a big thing. This was really a good source of money for everybody. Sometimes people made as much money picking hops for 3 weeks with their entire families and extended families than they made all year long being farmers. You know, if the weather was bad, sometimes hops money was the only money that they got for the year. They advertised it as an enjoyable camping vacation sort of thing, earning fun or making fun and having money under the blue skies of Oregon was one of the key slogans. And then the farmers would actually offer hops fiestas and bands and floats and queens and parades and concerts, dances and religious services, medical care, vaudeville shows, baseball games, and even matrimonial bureaus were offered. It was not uncommon at all for kids to go down there and fall in love and actually get married and come back with the bride. So,
Hey, Mark?
Yeah.
Yvonne Addington wanted me to throw in, not sure the right place, but this is as good as any, that during World War II, a lot of the moms and kids from Tualatin were recruited to go down to Aurora to pick during the harvest. So families that grew up in Tualatin would know about that extra money that could be made, especially during the war.
Oh yeah, it was important, and it was pretty much sold as an entertainment thing. Generally, hops, certainly in the beginning, it was just a family operation. Most of the hops fields outside of the Stevensons, if you will, were pretty much small 1 or 2 acre sort of things, and the family could pick their own thing and then sell it to one of the major middlemen, if you will. But this is one of the ways they would pick hops. They'd grab family out, and Dad and his brother would get on stilts and pick them. There were also carts that were elevated 6 or 8 feet tall that would be pulled by horses, and young women actually would be in the cart. They would drag it, inch by inch by inch, and then they would just strip the top parts. Another traditional site, if you will, happens to be in my neighborhood on the south end of the lake, the west end of the lake as well, in the Bryant hops yard. Charles Wesley Bryant came in 1852, and one of the things that he did was, with his 320 acres, was to have a hops field. And it currently is Lake Ridge Middle School that was just newly rebuilt. But the Bryant hops station was actually considered part of Tualatin at this time. This, in the Baker Cook diaries that I told you about, this is a picture of the hop yard at Bryant Station It's on Gene and Pilkington right now, and you're actually looking straight at his field. All of these people, and the names are listed down below, actually are in the Baker Cook diaries that I told you about. I've done genealogies and histories on all of these people. All of these people are Hazalia, Stafford Hamlet people just south of the lake. And where those people were sitting, they've actually found a rhyolite rock just a month ago or so, and that rock actually was picked up, taken over, and put here just in front of the Heritage Center. Now, to get people down, I told you they had to sell the hops, and the farmers vied with each other to get employees. And this is an example of one of the newspaper programs that offered all of these sort of things. The music apparently was much better than Dad's and almost as good as Grandpa tells about, and perfect order is maintained. That was kind of an issue. Some of the kids were really, really rowdy, and there were some police issues as well to deal with. But in general, you know, it was really a fairly good place to take your whole family, set up your camp, and pick hops and make lots of money for the year. And hop picking dances were really quite the thing, and it's even mentioned in one of the diaries that I was dealing with. And it states basically that most of the pickers are boarded and lodged by their employees, and the farms, the hoppers boarding houses are sometimes quite important structures with separate dormitories for the men and women. On smaller farms, less care is taken. With these places, all men and women alike are expected to make their beds. The food is abundant and good with a liberal allowance of pie. Apparently pie was a big draw. And the order was maintained most of the time, but sometimes dudes from the town invaded the hop dances and tried to monopolize the attentions of the prettiest girls. When that happens, look out for the storm. It won't do, however, to assume that it's always the dudes who get the worst of it, although it is usually the result of the contest between them and the pickers. So the townies and the natives actually would fight each other occasionally. Now, Tualatin hops. This is what our world looked like not too long ago. This is a map to sort of orient you on where we're going to go for the next couple of minutes. Of course, we're straight overhead Tualatin, the river up on the north side, Boone's Ferry and the Nyberg and Sagart and the Tualatin Sherwood Road and that sort of thing. We're looking straight down on the Cimino Ball and Eddy and Smith farms. Now, of the three families we're going to talk about, this is the location of the first two, the Eddy on the right, and then the Ciminos in the middle on Tualatin Sherwood. Eddy's on Boone's Ferry going north. Tualatin Country Club on north, the Historical Society there in red to orient you, and Kaiser Permanente there on Tualatin Sherwood. The first family is the Vital Cimino family. He was from, originally they were from France. His family lived in Louisiana for a while and then wound up in Missouri. And he moved here, was went to, like everybody else, he got here early and then went down to California and to Japan for gold, came back again. And Maria Sweek actually found him a wife, Sonora Boone, and they had 4 children, William, John, Adolph, and Josephine C. This is where they lived. Again, you're looking at Boone's Ferry there, Tualatin Sherwood, and the Cimino, Sweek, Ball, Eddy farms. And after Vital died in, I think, 1910, he gave his property to his children, William and John, and then his daughter's husband, Millop, there in the middle, and the Eddy on the right. The Tualatin Sherwood Road at that time did not go straight through to your right, if you will, or to the east to the freeway. There was no freeway. So it stopped right at Boone's Ferry. And after Vital died, John Cimino operated the hops fields for really quite a while, but pretty much like everybody else, the small operators had to eventually leave the business. It just didn't make sense. It was just too expensive for him. So he operated a dairy right there on Tualatin Sherwood as well. And was pretty much famous for getting the first milking machine. And he married Nettie Clevenger, and they had 4 children, and they're buried in the Winona Cemetery. And this is the Cimino family. Vital on the left, Sonora on the right, and John and Nettie there up above on the right side. This is the family out working, and you can see the drying barn in back. You're pretty much standing on Tualatin Sherwood looking north. And again, one of the things that I always find cute in these pictures is that you'll see the celebratory nature of people wearing hops garlands and hops in their hair, and wrapping hops around babies and dogs and that sort of thing. And this is another picture of the Ciminos, and you can see a hopper there. Same picture up closer. They would take the poles down and lay them in the hopper and strip them off, remove the poles, and then pick the hops and separate the flowers from the vines, if you will. Take the flowers and put them in that structure right in the center of the picture. Fill the bags, put the bags over to the right, and then take the bags up to the second floor where they would be laid out and dried. I think Vital is there on the right side, on the far right side in the back row. This is his obituary. It says, V. Ciminos, a well-known farmer residing about 1 mile west of the town of Tualatin, was found dead in an outhouse on the premises Thursday evening last. The cause of death was not ascertained. However, it was one of the unexpected nature by all accounts. That was in the Hillsborough Independent. Next family are the Eddy family.
Before you go on to the next family, let me just add that in between our meetings, Yvonne tossed in that there is still a very small farm on Tualatin Sherwood Road that the Cimino family owns. So they're still in the area.
Oh, that's
at least some of them.
Where is it? Do we know where it's located?
I don't, but I'll let you know, and I'll put it, by the time we post it on the webpage, I'll have a location.
Oh, wonderful.
I'll include it.
I wonder if it's that one that was just abandoned with the field that's open for development.
Could be. I honestly don't know.
We'll find out.
But,
I think
Yvonne, people like Yvonne and Moist just seem to know these.
Oh, I know. It's an absolute treasure. Anyway, I adore these families. This is just sort of a surface view of all of this. These families need to be evaluated and analyzed a lot further. And I'm actually looking forward to doing that. But anyway, Zeke Eddy and Elizabeth Eddy, one of my favorites. This is their house. And looking for to locate all of these things in the research that I do, you go to every map you can possibly do. And the topography map in 1914 is usually one of my go-to places. And this is actually the Eddy barn that we're going to look at here. I think the house is the first square dot just south of it. This is on Boone's Ferry, actually, at the junction of Tualatin Sherwood. And over on the lower left corner, I suspect that big square there below the 23, just to the left of it, is the Cimino drying barn. This is the Eddy farm. And there's a good close-up of both ladies with hops in their hair. Now, there's kind of a well-known person in this picture, Art Martinazzi. And Lois lit up when she saw this. It was kind of a fun thing for her in 1912. And Zeke Eddy came from Nebraska. His wife, of course, is a local girl. Byram's a very famous family in this neighborhood. And they're all, of course, all of these people are buried in Winona. And Zeke had problems later on with chicken thieves. When you research these people, the first thing you do is go to the newspaper database, and you key their name in and you see what you can find out about them. And sometimes the most remarkable things are there, like Vetals dying on the toilet in 1908 or whenever that was. But Zeke was plagued by chicken thieves. That there was a time when he actually lost a whole bunch of chickens, and he went out and caught these guys stealing his chickens red-handed, and their boots were splattered with blood. And anyway, Zeke prevailed. This is the third family, the Elwerts and the Schomburgs, if you will. And again, the Elwert farm was quite a bit west, a couple miles west of the Ciminos and the Eddy families. And he was actually from Germany. Married a local girl, had 3 children, Leo, Herbert, and Elvira. Leo turned out to be a bit of a pill. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And again, you go to Metzger Maps, 1928, and then he shows up. So you can begin to locate these people in time and space. And this is where his farm was, I'm sorry. On Roy Rogers Road, Shoals, Sherwood, just below Al's Garden Home. Again, just to the left of Walmart and Safeway, off of 99. I love this picture because it actually shows the, sort of the end of the season, if you will, when everyone's picked already. And you notice everyone has long sleeves, everyone has a hat. And the Elwerts are there in the doorway. And Elwert was actually probably the most successful farmer that I've read about to date. He was really pretty famous for high production, high yield, and earnings as well. He made a bit of a bad call on this and lost I think a quarter cent or something per pound or something like that. But basically, Elwert was a very good farmer and wound up in the papers quite a bit. This is him and his wife. Leo's right there on the right. I don't know who the other 2 are, but that's kind of a proud stance after a very good harvest. And again, chicken thieves seemed to plague this area at the time. He lost, 60 chickens to chicken thieves, as well as other neighbors from Sherwood. And of course, he's planted in Crescent Grove, actually. And this is what you see now. This is the Cimino property looking straight north on Tualatin Sherwood Road, looking straight north. This is where that barn would be, if you can remember that. This is the corner of the farm. This is right next to, you're actually standing in the Kaiser Permanente lot, looking, in this case, west at what's there now. This is the Eddy house. I remember the house I showed you a while ago. This is where the house stood.
Actually, clarification from Yvonne. She thinks it was a couple hundred feet south of there.
You know, it's off of Tonkin. I think Tonkin is right to our right, and it might have been in the on that side as well.
She said it was just across the street, what is now Tonkin. So it's 50, 100 feet away from where that McDonald's is. So and in fact, the barn, as you already mentioned, is still there at the end of the street. It's a business of some kind today.
Yeah.
But okay.
That's interesting. So there were two squares on that topographic map. One, the top one was where the McDonald's is, and then the south one was where their house actually was.
Right.
That,
That's what Johanna's saying.
That's
so
interesting.
You guys are in agreement.
That's interesting. Anyway, this is Tualatin Sherwood Road going today, going straight to the freeway. That was not there at the turn of the century. It just stopped right there. And this is probably the site of where the barn was, or one of the barns anyway.
Well, she says that one of the barns is still there at the end of Tonkin. And yeah.
Okay, is it on Tonkin or on Boone's Ferry?
Let me read for you exactly what she says, since she's not here to speak for herself. The home place, now my home place, now McDonald's site, Zeke Eddys' home place across on Tonkin Street, that house has been moved to Avery, so that house still exists. And Zeke Eddys' big barn is at the end of Tonkin. It still exists.
That's so cool.
And that's her, and I'm adding that that used to be if I'm thinking of the correct place, it used to be a rental place where you could rent like rototillers and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I don't think it's that anymore, but that barn is still there at the end of.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So,
anyway,
here and there, huh?
I think this is sort of the wonderful forensic work that we need to do, to dig down and resuscitate all of these memories and put these places in the exact spot where they are. Elwerts, the last family. This is the last agrarian place that is still agrarian. This is the Elwert property. I think that barn that you see there is probably not the drying barn where they were. I don't know the history of this place or where that is, but it probably was at or around this spot. And this is, I think this might be the spot where their house actually was. I don't think this is probably their house, but it would be very close to where this was. And this is a hops plant in front of the house here. Yeah.
For the record, we have a typo.
Yeah, anyway, this is one of the things I love about this institution is that you guys do things like this. This is so cool that you honor this part of our history with the hops cultivation and its influence on our community at the time. Anyway, this plant will start to be ready to be picked here in about 3 months. So. And this is my dog, Molly. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
I went to ask the first time we recorded this, but you had mentioned, at least in that presentation, that you're no big beer guy. You drink it twice a year in Spain in November, in Ireland, and when?
I drink it in August in Spain.
Oh, okay.
And in November in Ireland.
Okay, and you did that, why?
Oh, well, Spain, because usually it's at the end of a very long, hot day of riding around and doing things. So I just sort of collapse by about 3 o'clock, go in and check in early and get a beer and some peanuts and just calm down from the rigors of driving in Spain. In England, I'd sort of like to go and sit, and I like Guinness. I'll just sit and have a Guinness in front of a fireplace because Guinness is warm. God forbid you cool down beer.
Yeah.
So it's warm, and it's just sort of what I do. But overall, I'm not a beer person. Obviously, I don't know much about how it's done. I do have an interview with the brewmaster at Ancestry in a couple weeks. I tried to go to hops people and brewers to learn a lot about this, so I could actually study it, if you will, because I find the chemistry fascinating. But anyway, I couldn't find anybody who would sit down with me prior to the talk that we gave last week But I do have a talk with him in a couple of weeks, so I'll let you know what happens to that. I think what I'd like to do at some point is have both of our institutions come together, if you will, maybe in September, and have sort of a brewers here to talk about hops, to talk about how they do it now with the mechanical picking and all of the heavy duty industry involved in making hops for beer and how that's all done. So
yeah, I think that our membership would enjoy that. In fact, we could have same program on 2 different nights, and one at your place and one at our place.
oh, something like that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
We could figure that all out, and
Because
maybe
most of the effort's just setting up the program.
Yeah.
You get double bang for it.
yeah, I think we could have actually the real smart people that know about this stuff talk, and maybe some beer tasting to show a heavy hopped beer and a light hopped beer, and how they actually do that. I would find that interesting.
I
So,
think so too. And bring in one of those mechanical harvesters so people
Oh.
can actually see.
well, they're enormous.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they're like 3 stories tall.
Oh, they're really that big?
They're at least
I had no idea.
they're at least 30 feet tall.
Oh, no.
And they're just enormous, and they just sweep through.
Okay.
And they'll do an acre in a fraction of the time that the pickers could do it, of course,
Yeah.
without any of the
Okay, cancel
drawbacks.
that idea.
One of the reasons why we have so few hop producers now is because the enormous cost of the machinery. It's not just the hoppers, the mechanical pickers, but they have to all the pelletizing machines and the storage and all of that kind of stuff. Again, it's all done on the farm now. They used to break it up, but you have to have tens of millions of dollars to be able to set up an organization like that. And of course, like any commodity, it fluctuates greatly according to how risky it is. So one year you can have no demand for hops, and the next year, you can't have enough. So it's a precarious way to lead a life.
Well, it's clear that you did a lot of homework here, and we want to thank you for doing that for us. And anything else you'd like to add before we close this up?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to work with you guys. I'm actually a member of this society as well, so I'm blessed twice with my interaction with you guys.
Well, we're lucky to have you as a friend and as a colleague in our effort to preserve, promote, and interpret history, right?
Thank you, guys. If you ever need me, Ross can give you my number and you can give me a call, not only for this, but for other projects as well.
Oh, I thought of one last thing. Mark made it very clear that if he ever makes a mistake, don't hesitate to reach out to him. He's not too proud. He wants to learn. And so if you see something that you think could be better or is just flat out wrong, get a hold of me and I'll put you in contact with Mark.
That's so important. I really, when you first start, especially here, this is new ground for me. I've spent 5 years in Oswego and I'm still learning about that community, but this is brand new to me. So again, this is just the start. Any mistakes I make or any assumptions that I make, please correct me, not only for myself, but for the record as well. So whoever comes after us will not have to plow the same ground again. And a good example is the location of the Eddys house. We're only off by about 150 feet, but that's important to me. That to put places exactly where they were is critical history.
Okay, thanks
Thank you
everybody.
all.